A quiet chemistry teacher standing frozen in complete shock as three teenage boys corner her in an empty classroom, their hands reaching toward her chest while she backs against the lab counter in terror. Their crude laughter echoes off the walls as they close in on what they believe is an easy target. But what these arrogant students didn't know was that their soft-spoken target had once been known by a very different callsign in the mountains of Afghanistan. They had no idea that the woman they were attacking had earned her place among America's most elite warriors. They couldn't have imagined that their gentle teacher had retired from Delta Force after a classified mission that changed the course of modern warfare. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. This is the raw, powerful story of Rebecca Martinez, a woman who buried her warrior identity so deep that even she forgot the killer instinct that once made her legendary among special operations forces. It's a tale that will make you question everything you think you know about quiet strength, hidden power, and the dangerous mistake of underestimating someone based on appearances. Alone, Rebecca Martinez moved through the hallways of Westfield High School like a shadow, her worn sneakers making barely a whisper against the polished tile floors. At 32, she possessed the kind of understated presence that often went unnoticed in a world obsessed with attention and social media validation. Her dark hair was always pulled back in a simple bun, and her wardrobe consisted entirely of modest blouses, dark slacks, and comfortable shoes that allowed her to navigate her chemistry lab without drawing attention to herself. Behind wire-rimmed glasses, her brown eyes held a gentleness that made struggling students feel comfortable asking questions about molecular structures and chemical equations. But there was something else there too, something deeper that she kept carefully locked away. When she demonstrated lab procedures, her movements were precise and economical in ways that most people attributed to scientific training rather than recognizing the tactical efficiency that had been drilled into her through years of specialized combat instruction. The small city of Millfield, Texas, was the kind of place where everyone thought they knew everyone else's story. Nestled an hour outside Dallas, the community of 25,000 people prided itself on high school football championships, barbecue festivals, and the sort of neighborly familiarity that could feel either comforting or suffocating depending on your perspective. Westfield High School sat at the heart of this community like a monument to traditional American values. Its 1,200 students representing the children of oil workers, small business owners, and suburban families who had chosen the slower pace of small-town life over the chaos of urban living. Rebecca had been teaching chemistry at Westfield for 4 years now, and in that time she had perfected the art of professional invisibility. She arrived early, stayed late, and conducted her classes with a quiet competence that earned her satisfactory evaluations but little recognition. Her classroom, Lab Room 108, was her sanctuary, decorated with periodic tables and molecular models that she arranged with meticulous precision. She had created a space where even the most science-phobic students felt comfortable exploring the mysteries of chemical reactions and atomic theory. The only person who seemed to see past Rebecca's carefully constructed facade was Dr. James Patterson, the physics teacher whose classroom was adjacent to her lab. James was everything Rebecca appeared not to be: outgoing, confident, and always ready with an encouraging word for struggling students. His enthusiasm for science education and his genuine care for student welfare had made him one of the most respected teachers in the building. Despite their apparent differences, James had taken Rebecca under his wing from her first day at Westfield, sensing something in her quiet demeanor that reminded him of veterans he had known who struggled to readjust to civilian life. What none of them knew, what Rebecca had spent the last 8 years of her life ensuring no one would ever discover, was that their mild-mannered chemistry teacher had once been Staff Sergeant Rebecca Martinez, Delta Force operator with the 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta. hidden away in a climate-controlled storage unit across town, wrapped in military-issued cases and pushed behind boxes of old textbooks, sat a collection of commendations and classified mission records that told a very different story about Rebecca Martinez. Combat action badges, bronze stars, classified mission patches from operations that wouldn't be declassified for another 20 years. All accumulated during a 6-year career that had taken her to the most dangerous places on Earth, where she had served alongside America's most elite warriors in missions that shaped the course of international conflicts. The newspapers had never mentioned her name for obvious security reasons, but military personnel who knew the truth called her Ghost for her ability to appear and disappear in hostile territory without leaving a trace. Her commanding officers had been grooming her for promotion to Master Sergeant when everything changed in a single devastating mission in the mountains of eastern Afghanistan. The operation, classified at the highest levels, had required her team to infiltrate a compound where high-value targets were meeting to plan coordinated attacks on American interests. What should have been a routine capture mission had turned into something far more complex when they discovered the targets were holding civilian hostages, including American aid workers. The rules of engagement had been clear: minimize casualties, capture targets alive for intelligence gathering, protect civilian lives at all costs. But when the situation deteriorated and her team leader was wounded by sniper fire, Rebecca had been forced to make split-second decisions that saved her teammates and the hostages, but resulted in casualties that haunted her every night since. The mission was ultimately deemed a success by her superiors, and she was recommended for another commendation. But for Rebecca, the weight of those decisions had shattered something fundamental about who she thought she was. She had walked away from Delta Force that very month, ignoring her commanding officer's pleas and her mother's concerns about giving up a military career that had defined her entire adult identity. The tactical gear went into storage, the security clearances were transferred to inactive status, and Staff Sergeant Rebecca Martinez, elite warrior, became Rebecca Martinez, graduate student in chemistry education, dedicating herself to nurturing young minds instead of honing her body and mind into instruments of precision warfare. She had convinced herself that this quieter life was what she wanted, that helping teenagers understand the fundamental principles that govern the natural world was a more meaningful way to spend her days than perfecting techniques designed to neutralize enemy combatants. Her mother, Maria Martinez, worried constantly about the dramatic change in her daughter's personality. The confident, decisive young woman who had once commanded respect in the most elite military units in the world had been replaced by someone who seemed almost afraid of her own shadow. Maria had tried countless times to encourage Rebecca to at least maintain contact with her former teammates, to stay connected to the community that had once been her entire world. But Rebecca always changed the subject with a gentle firmness that brooked no argument. She had made her choice, she would say, and she was building a peaceful life that didn't require the skills or mindset that had once defined her existence. The truth was more complicated than that. Rebecca wasn't unhappy exactly, but she often felt like she was living a life that didn't quite fit, playing a role that required her to constantly monitor and suppress parts of herself that had once been as natural as breathing. When she watched action movies, her tactical mind would automatically assess the realism of combat scenes and identify procedural errors. When she heard about international conflicts on the news, her strategic thinking would engage despite her conscious efforts to remain disconnected from that world. The warrior was still there, buried beneath layers of academic routine and classroom management, but Rebecca had become so skilled at ignoring that part of herself that she genuinely believed it was gone forever. Her students at Westfield saw only the gentle, soft-spoken woman who made chemistry accessible and encouraged their scientific curiosity. Rebecca had a particular gift for reaching students who struggled academically or socially, Perhaps because she understood what it felt like to hide your true self from the world. She stayed after school to help with homework, wrote detailed feedback on lab reports that other teachers might have graded superficially, and created innovative experiments that allowed students to see chemistry in action, rather than just memorizing formulas and equations. This dedication to her students' learning and well-being made what was about to happen all the more shocking, both to Rebecca and to the few people who thought they knew her. Because while Rebecca had successfully hidden her past from her colleagues and students, she had not succeeded in making herself invisible to the sort of people who enjoyed causing pain to those they perceived as weak. She was about to discover that some situations cannot be resolved with patience and understanding, and that sometimes the only way to protect yourself and others is to remember who you used to be, when survival was your profession and violence was just another tool in your arsenal. The storage unit on the outskirts of Millfield contained more than just military memorabilia. It held the carefully preserved remnants of a life that Rebecca had deliberately dismantled piece by piece. Unit 247 at Secure Store facilities was climate-controlled and secure, rented under her civilian name with monthly payments automatically deducted from her teaching salary. Inside the 10x12 space, arranged with the same methodical precision that had characterized her military service, were the physical artifacts of 6 years spent among America's most elite warriors. The Pelican cases were stacked according to a system that would have made sense to any special operations veteran, but appeared random to civilian eyes. The largest case contained her combat gear, custom-fitted body armor that had stopped 3 rifle rounds during the Kandahar operation, night vision goggles that had guided her through countless infiltration missions, and communication equipment that had coordinated strikes against high-value targets across 3 countries. Smaller cases held specialized tools and weapons that civilians couldn't legally possess, maintained in perfect condition despite years of storage. Her service record, contained in a sealed envelope marked with security classifications that most people would never understand, documented achievements that would have seemed impossible for the quiet woman, who now spent her days explaining chemical bonds to teenagers. Expert marksman ratings that placed her in the top 1% of military shooters. Hand-to-hand combat certifications that qualified her to train other Special Forces personnel. Language proficiencies in Arabic, Pashto, and Farsi that had made her invaluable for operations requiring cultural integration and intelligence gathering. The photographs in her personal archive told stories that would never appear in official histories. Images of Rebecca in full combat gear standing beside helicopters in unnamed desert locations. Group photos of her unit posing with captured weapons and intelligence materials that had disrupted terrorist networks across the Middle East. Candid shots of downtime between missions, showing the camaraderie and dark humor that sustained elite units operating under constant stress in hostile environments. Rebecca's apartment in downtown Millfield reflected none of this hidden history. The modest 2-bedroom space was decorated in soft colors and comfortable furniture that created an environment of deliberate normalcy. Books about chemistry education filled the shelves where military manuals and tactical guides had once been displayed. The walls showed landscape photography and inspirational quotes about teaching rather than the unit patches and commendation displays that had once marked her living spaces. The transformation from Staff Sergeant Martinez to Ms. Martinez had been methodical and complete, guided by the same attention to detail that had made her successful in special operations. She had chosen chemistry education specifically because it required intensive preparing, and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Academic preparation that would consume her time and mental energy, leaving little opportunity to dwell on her former life. The scientific discipline appealed to the analytical mindset that had served her well in military intelligence, while the focus on helping young people learn provided a sense of purpose that felt constructive rather than destructive. Her graduate studies at the University of Texas had been completed with the same dedication. She had once applied to mastering advanced combat techniques. She earned her teaching credentials while maintaining a perfect grade point average, throwing herself into educational theory and laboratory science with an intensity that impressed her professors and concerned her family members, who wondered if she was using academic achievement to avoid dealing with whatever had driven her away from her military career. The decision to settle in Millfield had been strategic rather than random. The small city was large enough to provide anonymity, but small enough that a newcomer could establish a reputation based on current behavior rather than past history. The community's conservative values and respect for military service meant that her veteran status would be appreciated without generating excessive curiosity about the specific details of her service record. The school district's need for qualified science teachers had provided immediate employment that aligned with her new civilian identity. Dr. Patterson had been the first person at Westfield to recognize that Rebecca possessed capabilities that extended beyond her academic qualifications. His own background as a Navy veteran had given him insights into the way military training shaped an individual's approach to problem-solving and stress management. He noticed the way Rebecca instinctively scanned rooms upon entering, the efficiency of her movements during laboratory demonstrations, and the calm authority she projected when dealing with difficult students or dangerous chemical situations. Their friendship had developed gradually, built on shared respect for education and mutual understanding of the challenges involved in transitioning from military to civilian careers. James had served aboard destroyers during his Navy years, experiencing combat operations in the Persian Gulf that had given him perspective on the psychological costs of military service. His gentle inquiries about Rebecca's background were always respectful of her obvious desire for privacy, but he made it clear that he recognized her as a fellow veteran who might benefit from having someone who understood the unique challenges of that transition. The other faculty members at Westfield knew Rebecca only as the quiet chemistry teacher who rarely spoke during staff meetings and declined most social invitations. Her professional competence was unquestioned, her dedication to student learning was obvious, and her willingness to handle hazardous materials demonstrations made her valuable to the science department. But she remained something of an enigma. To colleagues who couldn't understand why someone with her obvious intelligence and capability seemed content to blend into the background rather than seeking leadership opportunities or professional advancement, Rebecca's teaching methodology reflected her military training in ways that most observers failed to recognize. Her lesson plans were structured with the same attention to contingency planning that had guided special operations missions. She anticipated potential problems and prepared multiple response strategies, ensuring that her classes ran smoothly even when equipment failed or students became disruptive. Her laboratory safety protocols exceeded district requirements, reflecting a professional understanding of risk assessment and hazard mitigation that came from years of operating in genuinely dangerous environments. The students who took her chemistry classes experienced the benefits of her hidden expertise without understanding its source. Rebecca's ability to remain calm under pressure made her laboratory demonstrations compelling and educational rather than merely entertaining. When chemical reactions produced unexpected results or safety concerns arose, her instant assessment and appropriate response impressed students and colleagues, who attributed her competence to excellent training rather than recognizing the tactical mindset that enabled such quick decision-making under stress. Her approach to classroom discipline reflected special operations principles adapted for educational environments. Rebecca understood that effective leadership required earning respect through demonstrated competence rather than relying solely on institutional authority. She set clear expectations, enforced rules consistently, and treated students with the same respect she expected in return. The few disciplinary problems that arose in her classes were handled with firm but fair responses that students recognized as reasonable and proportionate. The chemistry curriculum that Rebecca developed for Westfield exceeded state standards while remaining accessible to students with varying levels of academic preparation. Her background in explosives and chemical analysis had given her insights into practical applications that made abstract concepts relevant and interesting. Students learned about molecular structures by exploring how different chemical compositions affected the performance of materials used in everything from sports equipment to aerospace applications. Her laboratory exercises incorporated elements of scientific methodology that reflected her intelligence training, teaching students to observe carefully, document precisely, and draw logical conclusions from available evidence. These skills served her students well beyond chemistry class, preparing them for success in other science courses and developing critical thinking, abilities that would benefit them throughout their academic and professional careers. Rebecca's personal relationships outside of work were limited by her continued commitment to maintaining operational security about her past. She participated in community activities when professional obligations required it, but she avoided forming close friendships that might lead to questions about her background or family history. Her social interactions were pleasant but superficial, characterized by the same careful control that had once protected classified information in hostile environments. The isolation that resulted from this deliberate distance was one of the hidden costs of her new civilian identity. Rebecca often felt like she was living behind a glass wall, able to observe normal social interactions, but unable to participate fully because genuine connection required a level of openness that she couldn't risk. The loneliness was particularly acute during holidays and community celebrations, when her colleagues and neighbors gathered with families and friends while she maintained her carefully constructed solitude. Her evening routine reflected the discipline that had once prepared her for combat missions. Physical fitness remained a priority, though she had traded intensive tactical training for running and weightlifting. That could be explained as normal health consciousness. Her reading habits had shifted from military publications and intelligence briefings to educational journals and science magazines, but she maintained the same systematic approach to staying informed and current in her chosen field. The dreams still came occasionally, fragments of memory from missions that couldn't be discussed or processed through normal therapeutic channels. Rebecca had learned to manage these psychological echoes through meditation techniques and physical exercise, treating them as occupational hazards rather than symptoms requiring professional intervention. The official debriefings that had followed her military service had provided some psychological support, but the classified nature of her operations meant that long-term counseling was complicated by security considerations. Her financial situation reflected the careful planning that had guided her career transition. Military savings and veteran benefits provided a foundation of security that allowed her to live comfortably on a teacher's salary while maintaining the storage unit and other expenses related to preserving her former identity. She had resisted the temptation to completely eliminate all traces of her military service, recognizing that some part of her might always need access to those capabilities and resources, the weapon skills and tactical training that had once defined her professional identity were now maintained through private practice sessions at remote locations outside Millfield. Rebecca told herself that these sessions were simply a form of exercise and stress relief, but she recognized them as evidence that the warrior identity couldn't be completely suppressed through civilian routine and academic focus. The muscle memory remained, the reflexes were still sharp, and the tactical mindset activated automatically whenever she encountered potential threats or dangerous situations. This hidden foundation of elite military training would soon be tested in ways that Rebecca could never have anticipated when she chose the seemingly safe environment of a small town high school for her new civilian life. The trouble had been simmering beneath the surface of Westfield High School for months. Though Rebecca had initially tried to address it through conventional educational channels with her characteristic faith in institutional processes and professional intervention. It had started subtly, as these situations often do, with a trio of senior boys who seemed to take particular pleasure in testing the boundaries of acceptable behavior, while operating just below the threshold that would trigger serious administrative action. Marcus Thompson was the undisputed leader of the group. An 18-year-old with the kind of natural charisma that could be channeled toward positive leadership or destructive manipulation, and he had unfortunately chosen the latter path. Tall and athletic, with carefully maintained blonde hair and expensive clothing that reflected his family's wealth, Marcus came from one of Millfield's most influential families. His father owned the largest oil service company in the region and served on both the school board and city council, giving Marcus a sense of immunity that had only grown stronger as he progressed through high school without facing meaningful consequences for increasingly problematic behavior. His inner circle consisted of 2 loyal followers who complemented his leadership style with their own particular forms of toxicity. Jake Wilson, whose hair-trigger temper and willingness to escalate any confrontation made him Marcus's perfect enforcer, came from a broken home where violence was the primary method of conflict resolution. His aggressive responses to perceived slights or challenges had earned him multiple suspensions, but his athletic abilities on the football team had protected him from more serious consequences that might have forced him to confront his behavioral patterns. The third member of their toxic triumvirate was Connor Hayes, whose specialty was psychological manipulation and who seemed to derive genuine pleasure from identifying and exploiting the emotional vulnerabilities of their targets. Connor's approach was more sophisticated than his companion's crude aggression, utilizing social media harassment, rumor campaigns, and coordinated isolation tactics that left victims feeling helpless and unable to prove the systematic nature of the abuse they were experiencing. Together, they had identified Rebecca as an ideal target for their escalating campaign of harassment and intimidation. Her quiet demeanor and apparent vulnerability made her seem like easy prey, while her position as a teacher provided them with opportunities for public humiliation that would enhance their reputations among students who viewed authority figures as legitimate targets for entertainment and dominance displays. The campaign had begun with seemingly minor infractions that could be dismissed as typical teenage testing of boundaries. They would arrive late to her chemistry class with elaborate excuses, disrupt laboratory demonstrations with inappropriate questions and comments, and create an atmosphere of tension that made it difficult for other students to focus on learning. Rebecca had initially responded with the patience and professional restraint that had served her well in previous educational situations, believing that consistency and clear expectations would eventually modify their behavior. Her efforts to address the situation through proper channels had met with the kind of bureaucratic indifference that characterized many educational institutions struggling with limited resources and competing priorities. Principal Robert Chun, a well-meaning but overwhelmed administrator in his early 50s, had listened to Rebecca's concerns with the sort of polite attention that suggested he had more pressing matters demanding his immediate attention. The boys were simply acting out, he had explained, and perhaps Rebecca needed to develop more engaging lesson plans that would capture their interest and redirect their energy toward productive academic activities. Marcus Thompson was a star player on the football team that brought prestige and financial support to the school district, while Jake Wilson was dealing with difficult family circumstances that required understanding rather than punishment. Connor Hayes had been diagnosed with attention deficit disorder, which might explain his disruptive behavior and should be addressed through accommodation rather than disciplinary action. This administrative response had left Rebecca feeling frustrated and unsupported, but she had accepted it with the same professional resignation that had characterized much of her civilian career. She would find ways to reach these students, she told herself, because that was what dedicated educators did. She would demonstrate that chemistry could be fascinating and relevant to their lives, and eventually their behavior would improve through positive engagement rather than confrontational discipline. Dr. Patterson had been more direct in his assessment of the situation. When Rebecca had finally confided in him during a particularly difficult week, sitting in his physics classroom after school hours, surrounded by Newton's cradles and electromagnetic demonstration equipment, James had listened to Rebecca's carefully diplomatic description of the boys' behavior with growing concern and recognition. He knew Marcus, Jake, and Connor from their performance in his physics classes, where they had displayed the same pattern of entitlement and disrespect that apparently characterized their interactions with Rebecca. James had also observed their behavior in hallways and common areas, noting the way other students seemed to defer to them out of fear rather than genuine respect. His experience as both an educator and a military veteran had given him insights into the psychology of bullying that made him more attuned to systematic harassment than many of his civilian colleagues. James had offered to speak with the boys directly, using the kind of firm communication that sometimes penetrated teenage arrogance more effectively than administrative warnings or parental conferences. But Rebecca had declined his assistance with typical politeness, explaining that she needed to handle the situation herself through appropriate professional channels. She was a teacher, not a disciplinarian, and she believed that education and patience could resolve most interpersonal conflicts if given sufficient time and consistent application. What Rebecca didn't realize was that her measured responses to their provocations had been interpreted by Marcus and his followers as evidence of weakness rather than professionalism. In their adolescent understanding of power dynamics, her failure to retaliate or escalate had marked her as a victim rather than an authority figure worthy of respect. They had begun planning something that would humiliate Rebecca so thoroughly that the story would become legendary throughout Westfield High School, cementing their reputations as students who could intimidate even adult authority figures with impunity. The psychological warfare had intensified throughout the fall semester, with the trio developing increasingly sophisticated methods of harassment that operated below the radar of administrative oversight while creating maximum stress and discomfort for their target. They would coordinate their arrivals to create disruptions at crucial moments during laboratory demonstrations, forcing Rebecca to restart explanations or abandon planned activities. Their questions during class discussions were designed to waste time and derail educational objectives while appearing to demonstrate legitimate academic curiosity. The social media component of their campaign had been particularly insidious, involving the creation of anonymous accounts that posted disparaging comments about Rebecca's teaching methods, appearance, and personal life. These posts were carefully crafted to avoid direct threats or explicit harassment that might trigger school intervention, but they created a constant background of negativity and criticism that other students could see and potentially join. Rebecca's attempts to document and report these incidents had been complicated by the sophisticated nature of the harassment campaign. Individual incidents appeared minor when described in isolation, and the boys were careful to ensure that their most problematic behavior occurred when no reliable witnesses were present. The cumulative effect was significant psychological pressure and professional undermining, but proving systematic harassment required evidence that was difficult to obtain through normal educational channels. The escalation had been gradual but steady, with each successful harassment episode emboldening the trio to attempt more aggressive and public forms of intimidation. They had tested Rebecca's responses to increasingly inappropriate comments and behaviors, noting her continued attempts to address their actions through professional channels rather than personal confrontation. This pattern had convinced them that she was fundamentally passive and would continue to absorb their abuse without meaningful retaliation. Other students had begun to notice the dynamic between Rebecca and the three boys. though most were too intimidated or apathetic to intervene. On behalf of a teacher who seemed unable to protect herself, the atmosphere in Rebecca's chemistry classes had become increasingly tense, with students dividing their attention between the academic content and the ongoing psychological warfare being waged by Marcus and his accomplices against their instructor. A few students had approached Rebecca privately to express concern about the harassment they were witnessing, but their offers of support were limited by their own vulnerability to retaliation and their recognition that adult intervention had proven ineffective in addressing the situation. The most they could do was document incidents when possible and provide moral support for a teacher who seemed determined to handle the situation through official channels that were proving inadequate to address systematic harassment. The football season had provided additional protection for Marcus and Jake, whose athletic performances made them valuable to a coaching staff and administration that prioritized sporting success alongside academic achievement. Their status as key players in the team's championship aspirations had created an additional layer of institutional reluctance to impose disciplinary measures that might affect their eligibility or availability for crucial games. Rebecca had found herself increasingly isolated as the harassment campaign continued, with colleagues who were either unaware of the systematic nature of the abuse or reluctant to become involved in a situation that might reflect poorly on their own classroom management abilities. The teaching profession's emphasis on individual responsibility for student behavior had created a culture where admitting to harassment problems could be seen as evidence of professional inadequacy rather than recognition that some students required intervention beyond normal educational methods. The stress of constantly managing the harassment while maintaining her professional responsibilities had begun to affect Rebecca's sleep patterns and overall well-being. She found herself dreading certain class periods and planning lessons with one eye on potential disruption points rather than focusing solely on educational objectives. The warrior instincts that she had spent years suppressing were beginning to stir in response to the persistent threat, though she continued to reject any solutions that might require her to acknowledge or utilize her hidden capabilities. Situation was approaching a crisis point where institutional intervention would prove inadequate, and Rebecca would be forced to choose between continuing to absorb escalating abuse or acknowledging capabilities that could resolve the situation, but would inevitably expose the carefully hidden aspects of her identity that she had worked so hard to protect. The morning of November 15th started like any other Tuesday at Westfield High School, with Rebecca arriving early to prepare for her advanced chemistry class and arrange the laboratory equipment for the day's lesson on chemical equilibrium. The autumn air carried the scent of burning leaves and approaching winter, and the hallways buzzed with the typical energy of students transitioning between classes. Nothing in the routine morning activities suggested that this day would become a defining moment that would shatter 6 years of careful identity construction and change the trajectory of multiple lives forever. Rebecca had spent extra time preparing for third period, her most challenging class due to the presence of Marcus Thompson and his accomplices. She had designed a particularly engaging demonstration involving color-changing chemical reactions that she hoped might capture their attention and redirect their disruptive energy toward genuine scientific curiosity. The laboratory tables were arranged with precise spacing, safety equipment was positioned within easy reach, and her lesson plan included multiple engagement strategies designed to maintain student focus throughout the class period. Marcus entered the classroom with his characteristic swagger, flanked by Jake Wilson and Connor Hayes in their usual formation. Their coordinated entrance immediately changed the atmosphere in the room, creating the familiar tension that had characterized Rebecca's interactions with this group for months. Other students instinctively shifted their positions to avoid becoming collateral damage in whatever confrontation might develop, while Rebecca maintained her professional composure despite the knot of anxiety that formed in her stomach whenever these three appeared together. The lesson began normally enough, with Rebecca explaining the principles of chemical equilibrium, while demonstrating how certain reactions could be shifted by changing temperature, pressure, or concentration variables. Her voice maintained its usual calm authority as she guided students through the theoretical concepts, but her situational awareness was heightened in ways that reflected training she rarely acknowledged even to herself. She monitored Marcus and his friends through peripheral vision while appearing to focus entirely on the educational content. The first disruption came 20 minutes into the class period, when Jake Wilson deliberately knocked over a beaker of solution while pretending to reach for his notebook. The crash echoed through the laboratory as purple liquid spread across the floor, creating both a safety hazard and an opportunity for the trio to demonstrate their contempt for Rebecca's authority. Her response was swift and professional, directing students away from the spill while retrieving cleaning materials and neutralizing agents to address the chemical hazard. Marcus used the confusion created by the spill to position himself closer to Rebecca's demonstration table, ostensibly to get a better view of the cleanup process, but actually to establish tactical advantage for the assault he had planned as the culmination of months of psychological warfare. Connor activated his phone's video recording function, holding it at an angle that would capture the upcoming incident while appearing to document the cleanup procedure for academic purposes. Rebecca's tactical instincts recognized the coordinated movement and positioning, though her conscious mind continued to interpret their behavior through the lens of teenage misbehavior rather than acknowledging the genuine threat that was developing. Years of civilian conditioning and professional expectations had dulled her recognition of pre-assault indicators that would have triggered immediate defensive responses during her military service. The attack came without warning as Rebecca bent down to clean the last of the spilled solution from the laboratory floor. Marcus lunged forward and grabbed her chest with both hands, his fingers digging into her breast tissue through her modest blouse while Jake moved to block potential escape routes and Connor continued recording the sexual assault they had planned as their ultimate demonstration of power over someone they perceived as helpless. The shock of the physical violation froze Rebecca for a crucial moment, her mind struggling to process the reality of being sexually assaulted in her own classroom by students she had been trying to help and educate for months. The violation was complete and deliberate, designed to humiliate and demoralize her while providing the trio with evidence of their ability to abuse an adult authority figure without consequence. But the hands grabbing her chest had awakened something that Rebecca had spent 6 years suppressing, something that recognized sexual assault as a threat requiring immediate and decisive response regardless of the social or professional context in which it occurred. The warrior consciousness that had been dormant beneath layers of academic routine and civilian conditioning suddenly engaged with the full intensity of elite military training, designed to neutralize threats and protect assets under extreme duress. The transformation was instantaneous and complete. Rebecca's body shifted from the defensive posture of a victim to the balanced stance of a trained combatant, her weight distribution changing in ways that prepared her for explosive movement in any direction. Her breathing deepened and slowed as her nervous system activated protocols that had been drilled into her through thousands of hours of combat training, under stress conditions that far exceeded the current classroom environment. Marcus felt the change immediately, though his teenage understanding of power dynamics provided no framework for comprehending what was happening to his intended victim. The soft flesh he had expected to find beneath his groping hands was actually hard muscle concealed by modest clothing, and the trembling he had anticipated was replaced by a controlled tension that suggested capabilities he had never encountered in his limited experience with intimidating vulnerable targets. Rebecca's response came with the speed and precision that had once made her legendary among Delta Force operators who specialized in close-quarters combat. Her left hand clamped down on Marcus's wrist with a grip that trapped his fingers against her chest while simultaneously preventing him from withdrawing or escalating his assault. Her right hand moved in a precise strike to a nerve cluster in his forearm that sent paralyzing pain shooting through his entire nervous system. The technical execution was flawless, utilizing leverage and anatomical knowledge to control a larger opponent through superior technique rather than brute strength. Marcus found himself completely immobilized, unable to release his grip or defend himself against follow-up attacks, experiencing the helplessness and terror that he had spent months inflicting on his intended victim. Jake Wilson's attempt to assist his leader was intercepted by a defensive movement that redirected his forward momentum into the laboratory bench with a force that sent equipment crashing to the floor. Rebecca's peripheral vision tracking and spatial awareness allowed her to neutralize the secondary threat while maintaining control of the primary aggressor, demonstrating the kind of multi-opponent engagement skills that separated elite operators from conventional military personnel. The classroom erupted in gasps and shocked silence as students witnessed their quiet chemistry teacher transform into someone entirely different, someone who moved with lethal efficiency and controlled violence, that belonged in combat zones rather than educational environments. The contrast between Rebecca's usual gentle demeanor and her current display of physical dominance was so complete that several students would later describe feeling like they were watching a different person inhabit their teacher's body. Connor Hayes continued recording, though his fingers trembled as he captured footage that would become evidence of sexual assault rather than the triumphant humiliation video they had planned to create and distribute throughout the school. His psychological manipulation tactics were useless against someone who had been trained to resist interrogation and psychological warfare, techniques far more sophisticated than anything a teenage bully could devise. Rebecca's grip on Marcus's wrist tightened incrementally, applying pressure to nerve points and blood vessels with scientific precision that could render him unconscious within seconds if she chose to escalate her response. Her voice, when she finally spoke, carried an authority that no one in the classroom had ever heard before, cold and controlled in ways that made it clear she was operating from capabilities that extended far beyond normal civilian experience. Moments stretched on as Rebecca wrestled with decisions that would determine not only the immediate resolution of this assault but the entire future of her carefully constructed civilian identity. The warrior consciousness that had awakened recognized multiple options for neutralizing the threats posed by all three attackers, ranging from non-lethal control techniques to responses that could result in permanent injury or death. But she was also acutely aware that she was in a classroom full of teenagers, that she was a professional educator with responsibilities that extended beyond her own protection, and that utilizing her full capabilities would expose aspects of her background that could never be explained or rationalized to administrators, parents, or law enforcement officials who knew her only as a mild-mannered chemistry teacher. The choice between victim and warrior had been made the moment Marcus grabbed her chest, but the choice between restraint and devastation still hung in the balance. As Rebecca calculated responses and consequences with the cold precision that had once made her invaluable for missions requiring surgical application of violence in complex environments with multiple variables and innocent bystanders, the words that came from Rebecca's mouth carried the unmistakable tone of someone accustomed to giving orders in life or death situations, each syllable precisely articulated with an authority that penetrated the shocked silence of the laboratory like a blade. "Release is not an option you currently possess," she said to Marcus, whose eyes had widened with the dawning recognition that he had made a catastrophic error in judgment. "Your next decision will determine whether you leave this room walking or on a stretcher." The transformation in Rebecca's demeanor was so complete that several students would later struggle to convince their parents and administrators that they were describing the same person who had patiently helped them understand molecular structures and chemical equations for months. The soft-spoken woman who had never raised her voice or displayed anything beyond mild disappointment was gone, replaced by someone who radiated the kind of controlled lethality that most civilians never encountered outside of action movies and military documentaries. Marcus's attempt to leverage his superior size and strength against Rebecca's grip proved futile as he discovered that technique and training could overcome physical advantages when applied with scientific precision. Every movement he made to escape only tightened her control, the pressure points she was manipulating sending waves of pain through his nervous system that left him gasping and unable to coordinate effective resistance. His football developed muscles were useless against someone who understood human anatomy from the perspective of disabling opponents efficiently and permanently. The speed with which she had neutralized Jake Wilson's intervention had been equally impressive, demonstrating the kind of tactical awareness and multi-opponent engagement skills that required years of specialized training to develop. Jake found himself sprawled among the wreckage of laboratory equipment, his aggressive confidence replaced by stunned confusion as he processed the fact that their intended victim had effortlessly redirected his attack into self-destruction. Rebecca's positioning in the laboratory was textbook perfect, her back to the wall to eliminate the possibility of attack from behind, while maintaining clear sight lines to all potential threats and escape routes. Her weight distribution remained balanced and ready for explosive movement in any direction, her free hand positioned to block or strike with the efficiency that had once made her a legend among special operations instructors who specialized in close-quarters combat. The other students in the classroom were witnessing something that would reshape their understanding of strength, vulnerability, and the dangerous assumptions people made based on appearances. Lisa Chun, an honor student who had always admired Rebecca's gentle teaching style, felt her worldview shifting as she watched her favorite teacher demonstrate capabilities that suggested a background completely different from anything they had imagined. The quiet woman who had encouraged her interest in chemistry was revealing herself to be someone who possessed skills that belonged in military thrillers rather than educational environments. Connor Hayes's phone continued recording, though his original intention of documenting Marcus's triumph had been replaced by the recognition that he was capturing evidence of a sexual assault and its immediate consequences. The footage would later become crucial evidence in legal proceedings, but in the moment, Connor was too shocked by the reversal of power dynamics to consider the implications of what he was documenting. Rebecca's tactical assessment of the situation included factors that her former military experience had trained her to evaluate automatically: threat levels, potential weapons, civilian safety, escape routes, and the likelihood of additional attackers arriving to complicate the engagement. The classroom environment presented unique challenges, with laboratory chemicals and equipment that could become dangerous if the confrontation escalated beyond her current level of controlled violence. Her grip on Marcus intensified as she calculated the precise amount of pressure required to maintain complete control without causing permanent nerve damage, though she was acutely aware that escalation remained an option if circumstances required more decisive intervention. The pain she was inflicting was scientifically calibrated to overwhelm his nervous system without crossing the threshold into lasting injury, demonstrating the kind of restraint that separated elite operators from conventional soldiers, who relied primarily on overwhelming force. "Your accomplices will remain exactly where they are," Rebecca continued, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone who had given similar commands in hostile territory. Failure to comply resulted in immediate and terminal consequences. Any movement toward communication devices, potential weapons, or exit routes will be interpreted as escalation and responded to accordingly. The threat was delivered with such matter-of-fact professionalism that the students recognized they were hearing someone who had experience following through on similar warnings in circumstances where the stakes were far higher than a high school confrontation. Rebecca's tone suggested that violence was simply another tool in her arsenal, to be applied with the same methodical precision she brought to chemical demonstrations and laboratory safety protocols. Jake Wilson, remained motionless among the scattered equipment, his earlier aggression replaced by the recognition that he was dealing with someone whose capabilities exceeded anything in his limited experience with intimidation and physical confrontation. The casual efficiency with which he had neutralized his attack had been more shocking than dramatic violence would have been, demonstrating a level of competence that suggested extensive training in environments where such skills were matters of survival rather than performance. Dr. Patterson's arrival at the classroom door was prompted by the sound of crashing equipment and the unusual silence that had replaced the normal buzz of student activity. His military background gave him immediate recognition of the tactical situation, though the sight of Rebecca controlling a student through what appeared to be advanced combat techniques challenged his understanding of his colleague's background and capabilities. "Rebecca," he said carefully, his voice carrying the tone of someone who recognized that he was entering a situation requiring delicate intervention. "I'm going to need you to help me understand what's happening here." Her response came without releasing her grip on Marcus or shifting her tactical positioning, demonstrating the kind of multitasking capability that allowed elite operators to maintain engagement with primary threats while processing additional variables. Sexual assault in progress, perpetrator neutralized, accomplices contained, situation stable pending administrative and law enforcement response. The military terminology and situational assessment format that Rebecca employed provided Dr. Patterson with crucial insights into her background and current mental state. Her language patterns and tactical positioning suggested training that went far beyond civilian self-defense courses, while her controlled application of force indicated someone who understood the legal and practical implications of using violence in educational environments. Marcus's attempts to speak were limited by the pain signals overwhelming his nervous system and the recognition that he was completely at the mercy of someone whose capabilities he had catastrophically underestimated. His planned humiliation of a vulnerable teacher had become a demonstration of his own helplessness against someone who possessed skills that rendered his physical advantages meaningless. The classroom had become an impromptu demonstration of principles that students would never find in their chemistry textbooks: the physics of leverage and anatomical control, the psychology of predator-prey relationships, and the sociology of power dynamics when conventional assumptions about strength and vulnerability proved completely inaccurate. Rebecca's transformation from victim to controller had occurred so rapidly and completely that several students were still processing the cognitive dissonance between their previous perceptions and current reality. Her tactical awareness included monitoring of potential escalation factors, additional students arriving for the next class period, administrative intervention that might complicate the situation, and the possibility that Marcus's family connections might result in political rather than legal responses to his assault and subsequent neutralization. Each variable was being calculated and prepared for with the kind of comprehensive planning that had once made her invaluable for missions requiring precise execution under unpredictable conditions. The revelation of Rebecca's true capabilities was complete, but the consequences were only beginning to unfold as word of the confrontation began spreading through the school's informal communication networks and administrative protocols, activated to address an incident that exceeded anything in their previous experience. The quiet chemistry teacher who had spent 6 years hiding her warrior identity was about to discover that some transformations could never be reversed, and that authenticity came with costs that peaceful anonymity had helped her avoid. The emergency response protocols at Westfield High School had never been designed to address a situation where a teacher had neutralized a sexual assault using what appeared to be advanced military combat techniques. Principal Chun arrived at the chemistry laboratory within minutes of Dr. Patterson's urgent call, accompanied by the school's security officer and the nurse, all expecting to find a typical disciplinary situation rather than the complex tactical scenario that awaited them. The sight that greeted them challenged every assumption about power dynamics, victim responses, and the capabilities of their quiet chemistry teacher. Rebecca maintained her grip on Marcus Thompson with professional precision while monitoring Jake Wilson and Connor Hayes, her positioning and situational awareness suggesting training that none of them had suspected during her 4 years of exemplary service at their school. Marcus remained effectively immobilized, his earlier arrogance replaced by obvious pain and the dawning recognition that his family's political influence would be useless against someone who had just demonstrated capabilities that rendered his previous sense of immunity meaningless. The physical evidence of the assault was irrefutable, with Connor's recorded video providing documentation that would eliminate any possibility of claiming the incident had been misunderstood or exaggerated. Dr. Patterson took the lead in managing the crisis, his military background allowing him to communicate effectively with Rebecca while ensuring that the situation remained stable until law enforcement arrived. His questions were precise and professional, designed to gather information while respecting her tactical positioning and avoiding any actions that might trigger additional defensive responses. "Rebecca, I need you to walk me through your assessment of current threat levels," he said, using terminology that acknowledged her obvious training while maintaining the educational context that would be crucial for subsequent administrative and legal proceedings. Her response demonstrated the analytical thinking that had made her valuable for special operations missions, requiring real-time threat assessment and adaptive planning. Primary aggressor neutralized and contained, secondary threats passive, but unrestrained, civilian safety maintained, evidence preservation ongoing through third-party documentation. The clinical precision of her situation report provided Principal Chen with insights into Rebecca's background that would require extensive investigation and policy review. The woman he had known as a dedicated chemistry teacher was revealing capabilities that suggested military or law enforcement training far beyond anything disclosed in her employment records. The Millfield Police Department's response was complicated by the unusual nature of the incident, which involved a sexual assault, apparent excessive force in self-defense, and potential weapons violations that would require careful legal analysis. Detective Sarah Rodriguez, a veteran investigator with experience in both sexual assault cases and use-of-force incidents, recognized immediately that this situation exceeded the typical scope of school-based confrontations. Rebecca's cooperation with law enforcement was complete and professional, though her responses to questioning revealed a familiarity with tactical debriefing procedures that raised additional questions about her background and training. She provided detailed accounts of the assault and her defensive response, using precise terminology that demonstrated understanding of legal standards for justified use of force in civilian contexts. The medical examination of Marcus Thompson revealed bruising and nerve compression consistent with expertly applied control techniques, injuries that were painful and temporarily disabling but fell within the parameters of reasonable defensive response to sexual assault. The precision of Rebecca's application of force suggested training that prioritized control and restraint over maximum damage, indicating professional instruction in graduated response protocols. Jake Wilson's injuries from his collision with laboratory equipment were more extensive, but clearly self-inflicted through his attempt to assault someone whose defensive capabilities he had completely misjudged. The medical evidence supported Rebecca's account of redirecting his attack rather than initiating violence against him, providing additional legal protection for her actions. Connor Hayes faced charges related to recording the sexual assault and his role in the conspiracy to humiliate and assault their teacher. His phone contained not only the video evidence of the classroom incident, but also extensive documentation of the months-long harassment campaign that had preceded the physical assault, providing prosecutors with evidence of premeditation and systematic targeting. The school district's response was complicated by the revelation that one of their teachers possessed undisclosed military training that had enabled her to neutralize multiple attackers, using techniques that exceeded normal civilian capabilities. Superintendent Margaret Walsh found herself navigating unprecedented policy questions about background disclosure requirements and the extent to which employee privacy rights protected information about specialized training and experience. Rebecca's teaching colleagues experienced a fundamental shift in their understanding of someone they had worked alongside for years without recognizing her true capabilities. The quiet woman who had never asserted herself in staff meetings or sought leadership opportunities was revealed to be someone whose background included experiences that most of them could barely comprehend. The student body's reaction ranged from shock and admiration to fear and confusion as word of the incident spread throughout the school and into the broader community. Students who had taken Rebecca's chemistry classes found themselves reevaluating every interaction, looking for signs of the warrior identity that had been hidden beneath her academic persona. Lisa Chun, who had witnessed the entire confrontation, became an inadvertent spokesperson for the transformative impact of seeing their teacher's true capabilities revealed under extreme circumstances. Her account of Rebecca's composure and precision during the crisis influenced public perception of the incident and helped frame the narrative around justified self-defense rather than excessive force. The legal proceedings against Marcus, Jake, and Connor unfolded over several months, during which Rebecca was required to testify about both the assault itself and her response to it. Her testimony was measured and professional, acknowledging her military training while emphasizing her commitment to using minimal force necessary to protect herself and maintain classroom safety. The defense attorney's attempts to portray Rebecca as a dangerous individual who had overreacted to teenage behavior were undermined by the video evidence and medical testimony that demonstrated her restraint and proportional response. Her military background, once revealed, actually strengthened her legal position by showing that someone with her capabilities had chosen control over devastation. Marcus Thompson's conviction on sexual assault charges marked the end of his plans for college athletics and his family's political ambitions. The permanent criminal record and mandatory counseling requirements represented consequences that his previous sense of immunity had never prepared him to face. His public apology, delivered as part of his sentencing requirements, acknowledged both the assault and the broader pattern of harassment that had preceded it. The revelation of Rebecca's Delta Force background prompted extensive media coverage that transformed her from an anonymous small-town teacher into a regional symbol of hidden strength and appropriate response to sexual assault. Her story resonated with audiences who were hungry for examples of victims who had successfully defended themselves against attackers who had underestimated their capabilities. The school district ultimately retained Rebecca's services after extensive review and policy development, recognizing that her military background represented an asset rather than a liability when properly understood and integrated into their safety protocols. Her experience became the foundation for new teacher training programs that addressed both personal safety and appropriate responses to student violence. Rebecca's relationship with her students evolved in ways that reflected their new understanding of her capabilities while maintaining the academic focus and supportive environment that had always characterized her teaching. Her classroom became a space where students felt genuinely safe, knowing that their teacher possessed both the will and the ability to protect them from any threats that might emerge. The integration of her military identity with her educational mission created opportunities for Rebecca to serve as a mentor and role model for students who were dealing with their own struggles with identity, authenticity, and the courage required to stand up against injustice. Her example demonstrated that strength could take many forms and that the most powerful response to violence was often the choice to use force judiciously and proportionally. The anniversary of the incident was marked by a special assembly that celebrated not only Rebecca's courage, but the broader changes that had resulted from her decision to defend herself rather than submit to assault. The event highlighted the transformation of school culture from one that tolerated harassment to one that actively promoted respect and accountability among all community members. Dr. Patterson's friendship with Rebecca deepened into romantic partnership as they navigated the complex process of integrating her revealed identity with their shared commitment to education and student welfare. Their relationship provided a foundation for personal growth and professional collaboration that enhanced both of their contributions to their school community. 5 years had passed since the incident in chemistry, Lab 108, that had shattered Rebecca Martinez's carefully constructed civilian identity and forced her to integrate the warrior and educator aspects of herself into something entirely new and powerful. The woman who now stood before the packed auditorium at the National Education Association's annual conference bore little resemblance to the timid teacher who had once hidden behind academic anonymity and professional invisibility. Her keynote presentation, titled "When Victims Become Victors: Authentic Strength in Educational Leadership," drew standing ovations from audiences of educators who were hungry for real solutions to escalating school violence and harassment. The transformation from hidden Delta Force operator to celebrated advocate had created a unique platform for addressing systemic problems that conventional educational approaches had failed to resolve. The Rebecca Martinez Foundation for Educational Safety had grown from a modest local initiative into a nationally recognized organization that provided training, resources, and advocacy for educators facing violence and harassment in their professional environments. The Foundation's programs combined Rebecca's military expertise with educational best practices to create comprehensive approaches that addressed both immediate safety concerns and long-term cultural change. Her training seminars for school administrators and teachers had been implemented in over 200 districts across 15 states, creating a new paradigm for educator safety that went beyond passive victimization to include practical skills for threat assessment, de-escalation, and appropriate defensive response. The curriculum she developed balanced physical preparedness with legal understanding and psychological resilience, providing educators with tools that most had never imagined they might need. The documentary film, chronicling Rebecca's journey from hidden warrior to educational leader, had won multiple awards and sparked national conversations about the hidden capabilities that many people possessed and the courage required to live authentically despite social expectations and professional constraints. The film's impact extended beyond educational communities to influence discussions about veteran reintegration, sexual assault response, and the transformative power of standing up to systematic abuse. Westfield High School had become a model institution for comprehensive safety protocols and anti-harassment programs that other schools sought to emulate. The cultural transformation that began with Rebecca's revelation had spread throughout the district, creating environments where students felt genuinely protected and empowered to report problems without fear of retaliation or institutional indifference. Marcus Thompson's rehabilitation had become one of the most compelling examples of the Foundation's restorative justice programs. His transformation from entitled sexual predator to advocate for assault prevention demonstrated that even the most problematic individuals could change when confronted with appropriate consequences and provided with genuine opportunities for growth and service to others. His work with at-risk youth in juvenile detention facilities drew directly on his understanding of the entitlement and toxic masculinity that had driven his original behavior, combined with the lessons he had learned about accountability and respect through his supervised community service under Rebecca's mentorship. A young man who had once sought power through sexual assault now found purpose in helping others recognize the devastating consequences of such choices. Jake Wilson's anger management journey had been more challenging, requiring intensive therapy and multiple intervention attempts before he developed the emotional regulation skills necessary for constructive social interaction. His eventual success in completing a welding certification program and finding stable employment represented a victory for therapeutic approaches that addressed underlying trauma rather than simply punishing problematic behavior. Connor Hayes had proven most resistant to rehabilitation efforts. His psychological manipulation tendencies, requiring specialized intervention from mental health professionals who understood the complex dynamics of predatory behavior. His case had become a study in the limitations of restorative justice approaches when dealing with individuals whose harm to others appeared to be driven by genuine enjoyment of causing pain rather than environmental factors or treatable psychological conditions. The legal precedents established by Rebecca's case had influenced legislation in multiple states regarding educator rights to self-defense and the standards for evaluating use of force in educational contexts. Her testimony before legislative committees had helped shape policies that balanced student safety with recognition that educators were entitled to protection from assault and harassment in their professional environments. Dr. Patterson's marriage to Rebecca had created a powerful partnership that enhanced both of their individual contributions to educational improvement and community safety. Their collaboration had produced innovative programs that integrated physical science education with practical life skills, teaching students about physics and chemistry through applications that included personal safety, emergency response, and critical thinking under pressure. Their wedding ceremony, held at Westfield High School in the same auditorium where Rebecca had once hidden her true identity, celebrated not only their personal commitment, but the broader transformation of their school community. Former students, military colleagues, and education professionals from across the country attended the event that symbolized the integration of all aspects of Rebecca's identity into a coherent and powerful whole. Lisa Chen, now Dr. Lisa Chen, and director of the Foundation's Research Division, had spent her graduate studies examining the long-term impacts of witnessing authentic leadership under extreme circumstances. Her research documented significant improvements in student confidence, academic achievement, and social responsibility among those who had been present during Rebecca's transformation from victim to victor. The data showed that students who had witnessed Rebecca's response to sexual assault were more likely to report harassment, intervene in bullying situations, and pursue careers in service to others. The ripple effects of her authenticity had created positive changes that extended far beyond the immediate participants in the original incident. The storage unit that had once contained Rebecca's hidden military identity had been transformed into a memorial space that honored fallen Delta Force operators and provided resources for veterans struggling with civilian reintegration. The facility served active duty personnel and veterans who needed support in transitioning between military and civilian careers while maintaining their sense of purpose and identity. Rebecca's speaking engagements had expanded beyond educational conferences to include military transition programs, sexual assault prevention initiatives, and leadership development seminars for corporate and nonprofit organizations. Her unique perspective as someone who had successfully integrated warrior capabilities with civilian service provided insights that resonated with audiences facing their own challenges with authenticity and purpose. The international recognition of her work had led to consulting opportunities with educational systems in countries dealing with similar challenges related to school violence and educator safety. Her methodologies were being adapted for different cultural contexts while maintaining the core principles of empowerment, appropriate response, and institutional accountability that had made her program successful in American schools. The 10th anniversary commemoration of the chemistry lab incident was marked by a special ceremony that brought together all the stakeholders whose lives had been changed by Rebecca's decision to defend herself rather than submit to assault. The event highlighted not only her individual courage, but the broader transformation of attitudes toward victim responsibility and the social value of standing up against systematic abuse. Marcus Thompson's speech at the anniversary ceremony provided powerful testimony to the possibility of redemption and growth, even for those who had committed serious harm against others. His acknowledgement of the damage he had caused and his commitment to preventing others from making similar choices demonstrated the transformative potential of accountability combined with genuine opportunities for service and contribution. The evening concluded with Rebecca's reflection on the unexpected journey that had taken her from hiding her true capabilities to embracing them in service of others. She spoke about the importance of authenticity, not as a luxury, but as a responsibility, particularly for those whose hidden strengths could make a difference in protecting and empowering vulnerable people. Her final words resonated with the packed auditorium and the thousands more who watched via live stream. Strength without purpose is mere capability. Purpose without strength is mere intention. But when we have the courage to integrate all aspects of ourselves in service of something larger than our own comfort, we discover that the most powerful force in the world is an authentic person who refuses to hide their light under the bushel of others' expectations. The standing ovation that followed lasted nearly 10 minutes, with audience members recognizing that they had witnessed not just an inspiring speech, but a living example of the transformation that becomes possible when someone chooses courage over comfort, authenticity over anonymity, and service over safety. The legacy that Rebecca had built through her integration of warrior capabilities with educational mission continued to influence new generations of educators, veterans, and advocates who understood that true strength lay not in the ability to inflict harm, but in the wisdom to know when and how to use power in protection of those who needed champions, willing to stand between predators and their intended victims. The story that had begun with teenage cruelty and institutional indifference had become a testament to the transformative power of refusing to accept victimization as inevitable, demonstrating that the most profound changes often begin with a single person's decision to stop hiding who they really are and start using their authentic capabilities in service of justice, protection, and positive change in their communities and beyond. The ripple effects of Rebecca's transformation continued to expand in ways that none of the original participants could have anticipated when Marcus Thompson first decided to assault his chemistry teacher. The Foundation Scholarship Program had provided educational opportunities for over 300 students from disadvantaged backgrounds, many of whom had witnessed or experienced violence in their own schools and communities. These young people carried forward the lessons of courage and authentic response that Rebecca's example had demonstrated. The international expansion of her training programs had taken Rebecca to conflict zones and developing nations, where educators faced threats far more severe than anything encountered in American schools. Her work with teachers in Afghanistan, where female educators risked their lives simply by entering classrooms, provided her with perspective on the global struggle for educational access and the courage required to maintain learning environments under extreme adversity. The collaboration with military transition programs had created pathways for other special operations veterans to find meaningful civilian careers that utilize their unique skills in constructive rather than destructive contexts. Rebecca's model of integrating warrior capabilities with educational mission had inspired dozens of former Delta Force, Navy SEAL, and Army Ranger personnel to pursue teaching careers, creating a new generation of educators whose backgrounds provided both capability and credibility in addressing school safety concerns. The research conducted through the foundation had revolutionized understanding of trauma responses and resilience building in educational environments. The longitudinal studies tracking students who had been exposed to Rebecca's authentic leadership during crisis situations showed remarkable improvements in psychological resilience, academic achievement, and social responsibility that persisted through college and into their professional careers. Her autobiography, From Ghost to Guardian, A Delta Force operator's journey to educational leadership had become required reading in military transition programs and education leadership courses across the country. The book's honest examination of the psychological costs of maintaining false identities and the liberation that came from authentic self-expression resonated with readers facing their own struggles with identity integration and purpose alignment. The congressional testimony Rebecca provided during hearings on school safety legislation had influenced federal funding priorities and policy frameworks that supported comprehensive approaches to educational security. Her recommendations for integrating veteran expertise into school safety protocols had been implemented in pilot programs that showed promising results in reducing both violence and the fear of violence that undermine educational effectiveness. The advanced training facility that the Foundation had constructed outside Dallas served as a national center for educator safety instruction, bringing together military expertise, educational theory, and practical application in ways that prepared teachers for the realities of modern educational environments. The facility's graduation ceremonies regularly attracted media attention and policymakers who recognized the innovative approach to addressing systemic problems through individual empowerment. Rebecca's mentorship of other assault survivors had created a network of advocates who understood the complex dynamics of trauma, recovery, and the decision to transform victimization into empowerment. The support group she facilitated provided safe spaces for survivors to process their experiences while developing strategies for channeling their pain into purposeful action that could prevent others from experiencing similar harm. The technology applications that emerged from Foundation research had produced innovative safety systems that could detect and respond to threats in educational environments without creating the oppressive atmosphere that traditional security measures often generated. These systems utilized Rebecca's tactical understanding of threat assessment, combined with advances in artificial intelligence and sensor technology to create protective environments that maintained the open, welcoming atmosphere essential for effective learning. The cultural impact of Rebecca's story extended beyond educational and military communities to influence broader conversations about gender roles, victim responsibility, and the social value of hidden strengths. Her example challenged stereotypes about both femininity and military service while demonstrating that the most effective responses to violence often came from those who possessed both the capability and the moral framework to use force judiciously and proportionally. The establishment of the Rebecca Martinez Institute for Integrated Leadership at the University of Texas provided an academic home for research and training that addressed the complex challenges of authentic leadership in high-stress environments. The Institute's curriculum combined military science, educational theory, psychology, and ethics to prepare leaders who could operate effectively across multiple domains while maintaining their core values and authentic identity. The documentary series that followed Rebecca's continuing work had influenced policy discussions and public attitudes about veteran reintegration, sexual assault prevention, and the role of individual courage in creating systemic change. The global distribution of the series had made her story a touchstone for discussions about empowerment and authenticity in cultures where traditional gender roles and institutional authority were being challenged by changing social dynamics. As Rebecca stood in her office at the Foundation headquarters, looking out at the training facilities where the next generation of empowered educators was learning to integrate strength with compassion, she reflected on the journey that had brought her from the hidden storage unit containing her Delta Force memorabilia to this position of influence and service. The warrior and the teacher had become one, creating possibilities for contribution and impact that exceeded anything she could have achieved while hiding behind partial truths and carefully constructed facades. The future held challenges that would require continued innovation and adaptation as educational environments evolved and new threats emerged. But Rebecca faced these challenges with the confidence that came from authentic self-knowledge and the support of communities that had been transformed by her example of courage under pressure and commitment to using personal strength and service, of protection and empowerment for those who needed advocates willing to stand between predators and their intended victims. The legacy she was building would continue through the thousands of educators, veterans, survivors, and community leaders who had been influenced by her integration of warrior capabilities with educational mission, carrying forward the principle that true strength was not about the ability to inflict harm, but about the wisdom to know when and how to use power in protection of justice, dignity, and the fundamental right of all people to learn and grow in environments free from fear and intimidation. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.